Welcome to the Postcard Club for the May meeting. I'm excited about this tonight. It's going to be great. We have a great presentation tonight. Our presentation is by Glenn Koch. He'll give a presentation entitled Rare Postcards of the Panama Pacific International Exposition. I want to say first off that thank you very much for this presentation, Glenn.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy talking to postcard clubs, and you may remember I talked to your club some years ago with a talk on genealogy on postcards also, so you may remember that. I've been collecting postcards since I was in the third grade. I'm 62 now, so that's a long time of collecting. I collect primarily at this point in my life San Francisco, PPIE, and anything San Francisco related. I've been collecting those since 1989. So this is the Postcard Rarities of the PPIE. I called it Redux because I had done it once many years ago. So I refreshed it and added a few things to it. So why Rarities? That's because they are great cards, because the average collector doesn't often get to see those cards. And it's also to educate collectors and a few dealers on what a rare card really looks like with regards to the PPIE. My love-hate relationship with eBay, or how this all got started. As a budding collector, I would see these things on eBay and they would use postcard art, very rare, $25, only to come to find out that at the time, this would have been a $5 card or something like that. So the word rare does get bandied around a lot. And what does it really mean? Here's another one, $40 for a very rare card of the yacht harbor. It's not rare in the slightest. You don't see tons of cards of the yacht harbor, but it's not very rare and certainly not worth $40. Here's the one that always really kills me. This is the one that gets put out there all the time where people are always going about how rare this card is. But I'd like to just level set on that a little bit for you. This was produced for statewide Postcard Week for the supporters who were trying to get the fair to come to San Francisco. And it was October 10th to 17th, 1910. And this was the official card. 1 million of these cards were mailed daily that week. 300,000 California school children daily addressed 3 cards to friends and relatives in other parts of the country. That's a lot of cards. So even if only a fraction of them exist, it's not a rare card. Another reason people often think that cards are rare is because of books like this. When I first started collecting, there were books that were out there, but almost every book I found was on foreign cards or very early, like the Pioneer cards or something like that. This was one of the first books that I found as a teenager collecting postcards. And people used it like a Bible kind of at the time because there wasn't much out there. But this one, for example, basically said that a wide range of exposition souvenirs was available. Today, many people collect exposition postcards in their larger milieu of other memorabilia. Souvenir postcards from these fairs remain among the most desirable of postcards today. Price guide, pre-exposition issues get your congressman to vote, $10 to $15, and that was in 1982. Mitchell posters, color cards, $8 to $17.50, other posters, $10 to $20. That was a little more realistic, but even that was high for that time period. Now, let's level set with a few facts. The word rare means that it is seldom occurring or found. Scarce means that it's deficient in quantity or number compared with the demand, not plentiful or abundant. So when I said that these words get bandied around a lot, they get used, but I don't think people always necessarily really know what the definition is. And the thing with postcards is, as you're going to see, there are well-defined collectibles out there. That's the thing that all 3 of these images have in common. All 3 of these stamps, coins, comic books have a professional grading and valuation system. Nothing is ambiguous. Nothing is left to the imagination. unlike postcards, where rarity and value are often in the mind of the seller. So what you're going to see, we're not going to see the usual suspects, the buildings that everyone knows, the Palace of Fine Arts, the Horticultural Hall. What this does will take you to obscure corners of the fairgrounds. It's a mix of published cards where multiple copies would have been produced in unique one-of-a-kind real photos. The reason is I'd like people to be able to see the types of things that were produced and also what is still out there for them to find. This, while it would appear to be a fairly common card of Horticultural Hall, is more valuable because of the overstamp on it for the Esperanto Congress that was held at the fair. So it's not something that you see very often. I've only seen one or two versions of this. So let's get started. Now, two caveats before we launch into this even further. I want to talk a few words about oversized cards. And you can see here's a little penny on top of this card to just give you a perspective on how big this card is. Oversized cards are rare just because of their size. They were so big, they were often trimmed or damaged or destroyed just because of their size. So inherently, they are just somewhat more valuable. And you can see the banged up corners on this. I've only ever seen this card once, and it's got a beautiful back on it. It's a great card, but you don't see it often. And then here's the other caveat. Just because it's pretty does not necessarily make it rare or scarce or valuable. And at this point, I always tell a little story. I have a friend who is one of the biggest suppliers of china and crystal to replacements. He says to me that the weird thing about china is that there are these sets of china that were so expensive when they were made. When one comes up at auction and you try to buy it, you want to buy it, and then replacements is paying $1 a piece for it or something when it was one of the most expensive patterns. What they're paying lots of money for are supermarket china patterns because that's what everybody had and that's what people want. So there were tons and tons of these made. So while they're beautiful and while they're great cards, they're not the scarcest cards out there. They have value though. And the other thing too to point out is that crossover interest can boost the value of cards. While something may not be valuable to the PPIE collector, but they're greatly valued by the graphic art collector and the railroad collector or the roller coaster collector. So the first topic we're going to look at are under the title of Boost for the Fair. The purpose of booster cards was when San Francisco was in the running to get the World's Fair, they were competing primarily against New Orleans, and they needed an act of Congress to appoint the fair to whichever city it was going to be. So that school children's card that was mailed out in such huge quantities, you're going to see a whole bunch of other ones that were boosting for the fair to get the fair to come to San Francisco and get your congressman to vote. Now, what's not to love about this card except for the damage? But I'm going to just say this. This was one of my first PPIE cards, so I'm kind of sentimental about it. That's why I've never replaced it. But George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, steamships, battleships, dirigibles, Wright Brothers flyers, flags, countries. It's kind of got everything, and yet it's not a card that you see terribly often. And then there's the overstamp cards. These you see tons of, and they're generally just general views of San Francisco, and they're stamped with "Get your congressman to vote" kind of thing. These too were sent out by people, to people all over the country to try and get their congressman to vote. This one, though, is particularly rare because it's an overstamp boosting for the fair, to have it in Harbor View, which is basically where the fair did end up being, by a private company, the Phoenix Tool and Valve Company. I have never seen another one of these cards with this overstamp on it. Which one is the rare one? Some cards are good, some cards aren't. These are both great cards. They're Wiedner real photos. And as many of the biggest push for the fair was to show San Francisco's rebirth from the Great Earthquake and Fire of 1906. This was a series of cards that Wiedner did showing The Way We Dined in April 1906, and then The Way We Dine Today, the banquet hall at the St. Francis Hotel, and another one showing the place where we dined at the same thing at the Palace Hotel. The one on the left is fairly common. You see it very frequently. This one on the right, you do not see all that often. So the one on the right is the rarer one. Booster cards come in a lot of different styles. Some even actively refer to themselves as booster cards, like these two coming up. These are both Pillsbury photo cards that show San Francisco skyline, Lake Tahoe, and then another one, the next one showing the large buildings of San Francisco and one of the Spanish missions, a boost for San Francisco. These are two of a series of about 5 or 6, I think, that were made by Wheaton or Pillsbury. Here's another one. You see it once in a while, but I was ecstatic when I found this one. I love the drawn skyline of San Francisco undaunted. The little message on the back. We've got the time, 1915. We've got the place, San Francisco. We've got the money, $17,500,000. And now we want the fair. We ask your help. Be sure your congressman votes right. And it was sent to the Mint in Philadelphia. It's kind of cool. And to boost, they used humor. I especially love this get into line with the dogs all one on top of another. And the little bear down here, and the guys who are all bent on the fair. They use bears, which, if you get the rebus kind of thing in this, bear in mind, 1915, and a few pretty ladies. The one on the left always kind of makes me wonder if this wasn't the actual inspiration for the Hats and Beach Blanket Babylon. All of this to sell San Francisco. Here's a great one called Hurrah, the Fair is Ours. This is a real photo of Roos Brothers on Market Street in San Francisco at Stockton and Market. We were the first in announcing our victory, 27 seconds ahead of the next informant. That's the way we do things. Latest styles first shown here. And they unfurled this banner saying the fair is ours. And the vote was held on January 31st, 1911. It was initially 188 to 159 for San Francisco. But the final tally, after congressmen saw the writing on the wall, they voted in San Francisco's favor, and the final tally ended up being 259 to 43. Here's another one. We couldn't be happier. This is the mass meeting at the Merchants Exchange Building on receiving the news of the victory of getting the fair. Now, here's another one. As plans begin to take shape, these two are both oversized cards. The one on the left is a little more common than the one on the right. And the one on the right is twice the size of the one on the left. They're just shrunk down here. But again, the one on the left is a softer paper, and it's often very banged up, corners missing, and stuff like that. The one on the top is one of the series that was done by Southern Pacific promoting the fair and trying to get people to come vote for it and to come to it. And it's a dual Panama Pacific, the Panama California Exposition. And then here's one that's really great. This is, I call it breaking bread after breaking ground. This was the October 14th, 1911. There are a lot of cards of the groundbreaking for the PPIE, which at that time was held in Golden Gate Park because that's where they thought they were going to have the fair. But this is the dinner that was held at the Cliff House afterwards with all of the bigwigs who were pushing for the fair, and President William Howard Taft sitting here in the center of this kind of bump out of the table. Charles Crocker is on the left of him. C.C. Moore, the president of the fair, is on the right. At the juncture of the round and flat table is M.H. DeYoung from the Chronicle. P.H. McCarthy is the second one in here on the left with the big mustache, who had been the mayor of San Francisco. And all the way down here on the end, the guy in the military uniform, if you can see him, that's Colonel Archie Butt, who was Taft's aide de camp, and who just 6 months after this would die on the Titanic. So now here's another thing that always comes into play with these PPIE cards. 1915. Is it or isn't it? What actually constitutes a fair card? So now, one brief side note, and it's a philatelic side note. This envelope is in my collection. And what it says here is the first letter sent from the office bearing the new cancellation was addressed by Postmaster Fisk to his mother, Mrs. Lydia Fisk, 700 Hayes Street. The second, which this is, was addressed to C.C. Moore, president of the Exposition Company. From now until the close of the exposition in 1915, every letter leaving this city will bear the advertisement of the great event on the cancellation of the stamp. So this was the second piece of mail on May 17th, 1911, that actually used the Panama Pacific franking on it. So that means that from May 17th, 1911 on till the end of 1915, they were using it. So a lot of times you will see people saying, oh, it's a rare post. It's not a rare postmark. Every piece of mail had it on for 4 years. So, and I think that this, at this point, 1911, this was when all of this branding of the 1915 stuff started. So now here's two cards. Roy Francis flying over the Ferry Building with the big 1915 on it. Definitely a PPIE card. Here's one for Louis' New Fashion Restaurant with the 1915 up on the corner. It too. To me, if it's got this 1915 on it, the only reason it has it on is that it's somehow or other boosting for the fair, connected to the fair, promoting the fair. I consider these all PPIE. The one that you probably see the most often and the one that stumps people more than anything is this one of the New Year's Eve at the Poodle Dog restaurant on Bush Street in San Francisco. And this was the Berger Frank's Old Poodle Dog, which was one of a number of poodle dogs. But in the background, you see this big 1915. The thing that trips people up is when you flip it over, the postmark on it was 1913. So it was New Year's Eve, 1912 into 1913. So is it or is it not a PPIE card? Well, I think so too, because it's got the 1915. I kind of class it into. So the whole city gets in on the game. Here's a series of cards of the businesses of San Francisco and how they promoted the fair and their activities with it. This is a beautiful card of the painting The Victorious Spirit by Arthur Matthews that was backstamped for the furniture shop on California Street that was owned by Arthur and Lucia Matthews. And that painting was on display at the fair. Then here's another oversized and odd-shaped card. This was for a guy named M.G. West, who had a company that sold banking equipment, and he had a cartoon version of his body put over a cartoon version of the fairgrounds with a welcome rainbow and then an actual photo of his head put on the body. The big hotels got in on the action. This is a dinner that was held at the St. Francis Hotel with a working model of the Panama Canal right on top of the table that the banquet was being held on. And it was also an advertising piece for Julius Epstein, who was a florist and decorator who had a shop in the ground floor on the Geary Street side of the St. Francis Hotel. So it's got a lot of crossover appeal. It's very interesting, and it's definitely PPIE. Also, the Palace Hotel. Now, most people are familiar with Maxfield Parrish's Pied Piper in the Pied Piper Bar, or Maxfield's at the Palace Hotel. But here is one showing that, and it also says, meet me at the Palace Hotel, San Francisco in 1915. Now, there is a second version of this that I've seen from 1920 from the Democratic National Convention when it was held in June. So these are both of those versions are rare. Again, it's oversized, very oversized. It's kind of a softer paper. And so finding them in great condition is really a bonus. And then there were the small hotels, the Hotel Forster. It was just a standard site. On the back, they had the 1915 stamp on it. The Boat Chow Hotel at South Park with the 1915 stamp on it. And I can't read the message on it. For all I know, it even says something about the fair. Then there were cafes. They all got in on the action. This was the Bear Cafe on Pacific Street, 1906 gloom, 1915 joy, lest you forget 1915. Yes, even the street corner prophets wanted in on the action. This is a manufactured postcard of a real photo postcard of these two evangelists from the World's Fair Gospel Mission at 22nd and Shotwell Streets in San Francisco, that they then took the real photo and turned it into a postcard for mass consumption. So here's a couple cards that just defy categorization. This is a dual purpose California Exposition card. The main front piece is a silhouette of Horticultural Hall at the PPIE. The smaller one on the upper left there, the back, the divided back, is a silhouette of Balboa Park and the Panama, California Exposition. It was a giveaway from the Boston American newspaper, though it was postmarked from San Francisco. I believe they must have been handing these out probably in the Massachusetts building, or maybe in one of the buildings where they had like the newspaper presses and things like that for people to send out. But I think it was geared towards Massachusetts res. So I think that's what they were probably given out in the Massachusetts building. Now, a brief note on postmarks. This has the model post office postmark on it. That makes it a better card too. That franking, while it was used extensively, they had an active post office at the fair that all of the mail at the fair went through and got stamped with that. It is a bonus to find the model post office franking on a post. Here's two others. The one on the left is a hand-painted postcard. So who knows how many copies of that were ever. The one on the right is an embroidered card. And there were machines at the fair certain manufacturers had to where they would like feed something in, and it was like an automatic loom that would embroider these cards, and then they would sell them at the fair. I've seen a small handful of them over the years, but not many of them. Advertisers, they made free use of the fair. This is a women's clothing manufacturer showing the latest styles at the fair. I love this dandy in the middle with his multicolored suit and sword and all of that. There were a lot of special events held at the fair, and there are a lot of special events on cards. The nature of the fact that they were just 1 day kinds of things or 2 or 3 day kinds of things means that they were produced for a very small period of time, given out at that time or shortly thereafter. So they were made very quickly, disposed of very quickly. So a lot of them, it's questionable as to how many of them really exist. On the right is the World's Insurance Congress. Now, this was one from 1911 to 1912, New Year's, Christmas, promoting the World's Insurance Congress, which was going to be held at the fair. And it's a beautifully engraved postcard too, like done by one of the banknote companies or somebody. On the left is a real photo of Slavonic Day, which was September 20th, 1915. Here's a series of 3 cards of Norgesdagen, the Norwegian Day at the fair, an event with speeches and such, women in costumes, and then Vikings pulling up to the yacht harbor in their Viking longboat. I've only ever seen, I think there's 4 of these that I've seen, and I think 2 of them or 3 of them I've seen a second time, but those are the only ones I've ever seen of them. Here again, these were a couple of other special events. On the upper left is the dedication of the Pressman's building at the PPIE on April 3rd, 1915. That's where all of the news folk gathered, and the newspapers had their porters calling in stories and things like that. On the right in the upper corner is also a Pressman's dedication day. What makes this weird is these odd albino looking fellows in the middle of the card. And I think that they were people dressed up to imitate these characters called the Dinks, Dinks, who were cartoon characters in one of the San Francisco newspapers. I think it was the Bulletin. A number of postcards created about the Dinks with these cartoon characters on. I think because it was Pressman's Day related to the newspapers, these were supposed to be the Dinks. And then here's Mayor Rolfe speaking at German Day at the fair on August 5th, 1915. And that's well after the war had started, and we were not in it yet, and it was still considered okay to have German Day at the fair. And Germany was supposed to have a pavilion at the fair, but when the tensions started ramping up, it was quickly stopped and they never went further with it. Here's another one that I just really love. It's from the end of the fair, Farewell to 1915, Happy New Year, by Melville S. Toplin. And it's just a great card. This is Melville in the circle on the base of the statue. Now, there's an interesting side story to this. Melville was a partner in the firm of McDonald and Company, which was an importing business at 454 Montgomery Street. He was born in San Francisco in 1872, died unexpectedly in Hong Kong on the day of between the 9th and 10th of May, 1921, a day after arriving there on a hastily arranged business trip. He had rushed there to collect some debts that were owed to the company from businesses that were in crisis. He was 48 at the time of his death. Here's the weird part. His internal organs were buried in the Jewish cemetery in Hong Kong, and the body was shipped back home and was buried at Hills of Eternity Memorial Park in Colma. So here's some obscure structures and things. These are the stuff you don't regularly see. The Scott Street gates. They were the main entrance at Scott Street into the fairgrounds, directly in front of the Fountain of Energy and the Tower of Jewels, as you can see on the upper right corner. On the bottom corner is the same thing, but from a side view of it. And over here on the left is a one-of-a-kind real photo that somebody took of a man and lady waiting for a streetcar to come, showing it from the opposite direction. But what's really great is right in the center, just kind of to the left of the lady, is a Shell gas station that was just outside the fair. This was one of the first fairs where automobiles really were starting to play an active role in the fairs, and having a gas station close by was a handy thing. Now it's hard to get more obscure than this card. The first building erected on the exposition grounds. I just love this card. And I saw it many years ago when I was visiting San Francisco on display in the old Mint. And I was like, oh my God, I want that card so badly. I looked and looked and looked for years till I finally mentioned something to my good friend Chuck Bannock, who is a PPIE collector. And he was like, oh, I've got a couple of those. And so he sold me one. So I had been looking for a long time, and I guess he had most. Now, inside the fair, everybody knows about the Inside Inn, as many World's Fairs had an Inside Inn. At the fair, though, there were two others, the Inside Out Hotel and the Entrance Hotel, both at Chestnut and Pierce Streets. I do think now, it's taken me years to figure this out, that this is an architect's version on the upper left-hand corner. The lower right-hand corner is what it actually ended up looking like, because there are similar arched entrances, the pediment, the kind of bump outs on the left side of the building, and the recessed windows. So I think they just did a stripped down version of it and gave it a different name. They probably got sued by the fair or something for calling it the Inside Out, because it competed then with the Inside In or something. Those are both fairly rare cards. Here's another one, the Brick Home. Everybody knows about the House of Redwood that was at the fair. There was even a House of White Pine, which still exists in Oakland. But what I never realized until I found this card was there was actually a brick home at the fair. So it was built on the fairgrounds, was there for the run of the fair, and there was actually a lady living in this house through the entire run of the fair. And then here's another one. Who knew? The administration building of the PPIE was at Pine and Battery Streets in downtown San Francisco. The building is still there, kind of uglified. It had all of the beautiful details and stuff removed, but it's still extant. And there's an interesting story about this building. There was a guy who worked for the fair, a very large black man who wore a white uniform, and his name was Billy. He Every morning and night, he would go up on the roof of that building, blast this giant trumpet horn that he had out over the city morning and night for 3 years from the top of that building. Here's two structures that were unbuilt at the fair. On the upper left is the Temple of Childhood, which was kind of a scammy kind of thing. It was supposed to be built, and they had parents sending in photos of their little children to be enshrined in the Temple of Childhood. And it was supposed to be everything about children and whatever. There are certificates out there of people who sent pictures in and paid and got the certificate. In the end, the building was never built. Then this one should be near and dear to all of us, the Nest Builder's certificate for the collector's nest at the PPIE. It was affiliated with the movement to build a clubhouse as headquarters for visiting collectors of postcards, stamps, coins, and curios at the Panama Exposition to be held in San Francisco in 1915, and promises to aid in the erection in every way possible. As we all know, at least the PPIE folks, that building never got built. The Casey Jones is another one, the Overfair Railway, which ran around the perimeter of the fair. People could get on, get off, and ride it all around the fairgrounds. It was a big attraction at the fair. There are not a lot of cards of it, mostly real photo cards. So when you see those, they're good cards. And then other modes of transportation. This one on the upper left of this amphibious vehicle driving into the marina in the bay, I've never seen before or since the time I got this card. I don't even know if there's another copy of it out there, but it's taken in front of the breakwater at the marina, which was where all of the Klieg lights were that they used to do the scintillator, which had a steam engine. They would pump steam up into the sky and then run these colored lights, and they'd fan back and forth over the night sky. And that was all done from these giant searchlights that were on this breakwater. And then down below, too, is a great real photo of one of the cars of the Thagil auto trains, which were these long trains that were pulled by a little car that you could ride on also that went around other parts of the fairground. There are a couple mass-produced ones of the actual cars and the train cars. This is the only one I've ever seen that shows a close-up of people riding on one of the cars. Here's a postcard folder for the Maxwell Racer, which was a racing car. What's great about this is the photo on the back of it. Mayor Rolfe, Barney Oldfield, and Governor Hiram Johnson all posed around Barney Oldfield's racing car at the fair. When you opened this up, it had a small folded booklet that talked about all the different models of Maxwell cars and things like that. Again, very, very scarce. Now, a lot of people don't realize that a large part of the fair was given over to livestock. And this was an area that was kind of behind where the state buildings were and leading up to kind of where the Presidio is at. The buildings in the upper left corner with the orange roofs, those were actually designed by Bernard Maybeck, and a piece of one of those still exists at one of the former Hearst ranches downstate further. So you don't see many cards of the livestock stuff, or also the livestock itself that was displayed there. So these are really good. These are from the Black Hawk Stock Ranch in Burlingame, one of their giant Shire stallions, and then the interiors of the stables that they had there. Here's one of a lady with a trick in the livestock arena where they would put on livestock shows. So there were a lot of foreign country pavilions at the fair. The greatest majority of the cards of those buildings are fairly common. They were very mass produced and they sold very well. There are exceptions, though. Here's two. This one on the top is a triple fold card of the dedication of the Bolivian pavilion. On the bottom is a real photo of the dedication of the Argentine. Here are two more. The pavilion of Bolivia, an interior, and a Cuba at the exposition in the agricultural building. Neither of these cards are very common at all. And then there's this series of the Cuba pavilion itself. There are not many cards showing interior views of the different pavilions. This Cuba pavilion set is very beautiful. You do not see it very often. If you see any of them, you'll sometimes see the one with the tower on the left, but the other ones are not that common at all. I don't know why. You would think they would have been handed out very freely, but you don't see them that often. Here are three cards relating to the Norway building, the Norway pavilion. On the bottom left is a shovel that we used for the groundbreaking exercises for the Norway pavilion. The shovel is a unique trophy of the Arctic from the wreck of the ship Victoria of Sir John Ross Arctic expedition by the natives of Botia and presented to Captain Roald Amundsen when engaged in relocating the magnetic pole during the voyage of his discovery of the Northwest Passage. So he must have given it to the Norwegian folks in San Francisco, and they used it for the groundbreaking. On the top is a wall painting of the entrance to the harbor of Willemstad, which Curaçao, that was in the Netherlands Pavilion. And this one on the right is really interesting because it's kind of a multi-purpose thing. It's the Sons of Norway Monument Committee. They were erecting a monument in San Francisco, or planning to. This card is from 1912, but dated 1915 up on the top. It shows the Yoa, which was Amundsen's boat that he sailed through the Northwest Passage and then gave to the city of San Francisco for many years, was at the farthest west end of Golden Gate Park. And then off in the distance, the Panama Pacific Expo site. And here's a set of cards from the Denmark building. Now, these cards are probably some of my favorites of the fair. They are more scarce than they are rare, but what makes them even rarer is they are oversized. And again, you often see them with damage or the color isn't bad, but these are very true to form. This gilding on them, it's just a beautiful set of cards. It was a beautiful building. They're very much reminiscent of the Wiener Werkstatt cards from Austria. Here are two more from that series. I just think that they're absolutely beautiful. And then the state pavilions too. There are a lot of cards of all the different state pavilions, but in amongst all of those are some really great ones. The California building, it was the biggest state building at the fair. It was huge. It covered a massive amount of ground just west of where the Palace of Fine Arts was on the bay. This is a great one for Christmas with an overview of the entire California building. Now, what is extremely rare of the California building are interior views of the California exhibits. The large part of this building in the back here, this on the right-hand side of the picture, was where the California County exhibits were held. In there were a myriad of booths and display booths and for all the different counties. Like you can see on the upper right one, that the upper right one, there's an arch and that says Contra Costa on it. Over to the side of it is another one that says Lassen County. So those were the exhibits for those counties. On the left, kind of tilted, is the Sacramento County exhibit with a giant Capitol dome on the right-hand side of it. And on the bottom is the San Mateo County exhibit right in the center there. And I think on one of the others, on the top one on the right too, on the far left in the back with the kind of peaked roof, that's the Alameda County exhibit. And here's another weird, multifaceted California one. This was from Solano County. And what's really kind of crazy about it is it's slightly mechanical because you open it up. There's money in this can for you. And it's cream from Solano County. When you open it up, the little tab says $1,000. It's got a map of Solano County, promotes all of the wonders of Solano County. And then on the right-hand side, there's this really crazy story about Solano County won the grand prize at the 1894 California Midwinter Exposition, this solid gold trophy that was encrusted with jewels and things that was put on exhibit in the California Ferry Building, and it was stolen on February 23rd, 1910. So this card was also announcing $1,000 reward for the return of this gigantic loving cup. I don't know if it was ever returned or not. I've never been able to figure that out. Cards produced of some of the smaller individual county exhibits also. Stanislaus County up here on the left. On the right, the Tulare County with the Tulare Alfalfa Girl, she was called. There was a taxidermy calf, and this lady was bedecked in an outfit and hat made all of alfalfa. A lot of these exhibits, too, they had tons of these jars of preserved vegetables, fruits, and things that the county produced, big bins of seeds of the different seeds that were produced and grown in the county. They often had these big framed photos of scenic places within the county. And then on the left, this is a giant reproduction of the Santa Barbara mission facade that was in the Santa Barbara County exhibit. This is a very weird one. I've only ever seen this one copy, and I don't even own it. It was the Trinity County Gold Nugget. You would address it, and it gave you a ticket number on the opposite side that you could win a free gold nugget that was going to be given away on Sacramento Valley Day on August 21st, 1915. Then in the larger part of the California building, there were other meeting rooms, dining rooms, things like that. One of those rooms, the California Auxiliary Tea Room. And this is a large overview. It was kind of upstairs in the building. And it was a beautiful building. There were all of these women volunteers from all over the state who came, served the visitors who came and dined in this tea room. In the far distance was a gigantic mural by Florence Lundberg. These are two smaller shots of different parts of that mural. New York City had its own building at the PPIE. You rarely ever see this card of the City of New York building. You see the New York State building a lot, but not that one. Here's one that I've only ever seen once or twice, and it was called the New York State Big Cheese, and it was the largest cheese ever made. It was on display in the Agricultural Palace. Here again is another giant oversized card. This was Iowa, that were the river of corn flowing out of a horn from the land of plenty. And it was all these ears of corn, Iowa spelled out in colored corn on it. And then on the back, it listed all of the crops from 1914 of Iowa. They say that at that time, they were the only billion-dollar state in production of agricultural. So here's another category of interesting, generally scarce cards. And this is the who's who of visitors to the PPIE as portrayed on postcards. So all I have to say is, does it get much better than this? Teddy Roosevelt, with Art Smith, the PPIE bird boy, who did all of the loop-de-loops and flying at night and trailing smoke and all of that kind of stuff, posed on Art Smith's plane before Art Smith was going to take off on a flight. Teddy Roosevelt came to the fair for Roosevelt Day, actually. And then here are a couple more Art Smith cards. He was a diminutive guy. He would drive this little racer called the Baby around the fairgrounds. And he could fit into the muzzle of the breech of a large gun. These are real photo versions of this. There are printed versions of it, but these are available than the printed versions of it. And then here too are two more real photos of Roosevelt giving a speech to the enlisted men at the PPIE. The other flyer at the fair was Lincoln Beachey. For those who don't know, Beachey was the first flyer at the fair. He crashed spectacularly into the bay and died. This is a real photo card of the divers descending into the bay searching for Beachy's body. For those who've ever come to the San Francisco Postcard Club, right up here on this second floor on the end is where we hold our meetings, looking right down onto the bay at that spot. Here are two others. This is on the left, General Goethals, who was the builder of the Panama Canal. And on the right, everyone's favorite American anti-Semite, Henry Ford and his wife, on the USS Oregon. Here's an interesting little printed card that does not turn up very often. And this was Gustav Petzl, who left San Francisco on June 13th, 1914, rolling this steel ball, which was 4 foot 6 inches in diameter and weighed 180 pounds. And he was rolling it over the Lincoln Highway to New York. And if he made it to New York within 6 months, he would get $1,000. This is a series of kind of cards too. This is Catherine Hagelin, who was San Francisco's 1915 mascot. And she was, by all measure, a darling little child. But she was basically San Francisco's Honey Boo Boo of her day. She was born in 1910 in Harborview. She started as the San Francisco City Beautiful mascot at age 2, then the Portola mascot in 1913. She drove an automobile in a parade in 1914 at age 4. The Golden Gate Association started to push for her as the PPIE mascot, and she asked Mayor Rolfe to make her the 1915 mascot. So she was there. There are images of her at the fair. There's a very common stereo view that shows her on the fairgrounds. She was an interesting character. By 1930, she was an actress in motion pictures, rooming at a house on Crenshaw Boulevard in Hollywood in 1940 as the partner of Martha Wilkie, a stage actor, while Catherine is a recreation supervisor of a city playground. And that's the last her trail seems to drop off from there. So one of the big things of the fair was companies there showing their products, peddling their wares at the PPIE. And there are great cards of the exhibitor booths. These are the most common cards of this genre. And like I told you in that story before, just because it's pretty doesn't mean that it's a great card. These, the GE Electric House on the lower corner and the Moorish Temple, the Fuller Moorish Temple in the middle, are probably two of the most beautiful cards produced for the fair, but they are out there in abundance. They really, while they're beautiful and good graphically, they're not the rarest cards. The Rainier beer ones, while beer collectors probably love them, they're fairly common. The Holt Manufacturing Company one here on the upper left, that one is fairly common too. However, these, on the other hand, are ones you don't see very often. This is the French American Wine Company on the upper corner, and on the bottom, the Cresta Blanca wine and Parmesan champagne. You'll notice the columns are made of wine casks and have grapes hanging all over them. But this is where a number of the different vintners showed their products at. Here's a kind of large, oversized card, too, for the Calfway Milker, which is to hand milking what the auto is to walking. In those days, the auto milking cows was a new thing. They were there pitching their product. Here's another weird one too, and this is kind of, it's oversized. It's more almost like envelope shaped, 4-fold. It shows the Tower of Jewels, an overview of the fair, about the exposition. When you open it up, Niagara made silk products, gloves, stockings, underwear. Quite frankly, I've often wondered if this wasn't slightly created more for men than it was for women, because seeing women in their silky underwear, bare-shouldered, seems to me like it would have been a rather risque thing for 1950. I've often wondered if that was really the purpose of it. One of the other things at the fair that was really kind of a big kind of sub-story was the decline fall of the Native American populations of the United States. And it was best showed, played out to people by the statue of the end of the trail that you saw earlier with the Melville Toplitz card of the Indian hunched over on his horse, kind of at the western coastline at the end of the trail for them. And it really was kind of, in many ways, looked at that way. One of the people, though, who was really concerned about that was Rodman Wanamaker. And he was the son of John Wanamaker, the Philadelphia department store magnate. They also had a store in New York City. He sent out a photographer, and I think it was Edward Curtis that he sent out to travel the plains, taking photographs of these Indian tribes, that Native American tribes that were still left in costumes and in makeup and doing all of the things that they did to create a permanent record of this culture that was disappearing. In the Palace of Education, there was a large exhibit, the Rodman Wanamaker Indian Exposition, that showed a great many of these photos of the exhibit. And this card is very scarce and highly sought after because it, again, is one of those things that appeals to a lot of different people: Native American collectors, Western collectors, the PPIE, photography collectors. So it's very scarce. There is a little booklet that kind of comes along with it too that you see sometimes. And over here is the Oregon City Woolen Mills with their genuine Indian blankets. They had a working exhibit in the Varied Industries Palace. Here are three more. The George Washington Refined Coffee exhibit on the left. On the top right is the John B. Stetson Company from Philadelphia, the maker of the famous Stetson hat that won the West. And on the bottom, the exhibit Alliance California Glacé Fruit Company. A couple more. The upper left, this is from the Japan Tourist Bureau Chosen branch. And these are scenes in Congo-san, the Diamond Mountain, and they were from the Japanese Railway. And there's a series of them. And they come, if you are lucky enough to find it, in its very own little envelope that's decorated beautifully too. To find the entire set in the envelope is a feat. Rarely do you see them all. I think the envelope didn't hold up very well over the years. On the bottom left is the Forsyth Dentist exhibit. And what always cracks me up about this is there's a little girl laying in the dental chair there, just waiting to have her teeth drilled, I guess. Think about a horrible thing that would be on exhibit, having your teeth drilled for people. And on the right, well, this is kind of a stock card. This is for the International Silver Company, which was in the Palace of Varied Industries, and they were inviting you to come in to see. This was the 1847 Rogers Brothers silver plate that wears. There are a couple of these. I've only ever seen two that advertise different patterns of their silver. Now, here is the one that Chuck Bannock and Chuck has nominated for both the rarest and the ugliest PPIE card. It is from the Michigan College of Mines Alumni Association, and it's a picture of their register and a very muddy, very horrible image of their campus. And the thing that makes it especially rare is this thing is like a limp noodle. You pick it up, it just like curls in your hand. It's so delicate. You can see kind of in the upper corner, there's creases and stuff. It's a wonder that it even existed. Chuck has said this is the only one he's ever seen of it. I've never, except for his, seen one out in the wild. Here's a really great one. The Kuffel and Esser Company, they made drawing materials, slide rules, surveying instruments, telescopic sights, and periscopes. This is a big double fold card. So again, the oversized, it's in remarkably good shape for how big it is. Here are two other really big, oversized, fabulous cards. On the right and the bottom is the Rudgear Merle Company. This was a gigantic hand-chased cast bronze bed that at that time was valued at $5,000. I can only imagine how much this thing weighed, but it was on display at the fair, won the grand prize and gold medal. And on the left is the Keen Cutter exhibit. This card is really big. It's almost always damaged when you see it, but this exhibit must have really been something to see. Every item that was on display in this structure was a keen cutter project. Up on the top of the tower, the railing are crossed axes. Down below are men hammering on anvils. There's giant scissors below the angels. The fountains are made of chains, which were constantly circulating to look like water. The fence in the front are mallets. And the interesting thing is on the side of this, it talks through what all of the different things were that went into putting this on display. Oh, the things all around the clock face were sights. Here's another one they're fairly scarce. They're out there. This is the Victor exhibit, and this was Victor Records, his master's voice, Nipper the dog. This shows on the outside their pavilion, which still exists today. It was moved to San Rafael after the fair, and for many years was the Women's Civic Improvement Club. Now it's a private legal office. But what's really great about this card is when you open it up, it has a view of the fair, but then a three-dimensional view of a husband and wife sitting in their living room, listening to a full-fledged opera of Lilliputians all performing in their living room, I guess. But it was to show that you could get dressed up and not even have to go out to the opera. You could sit at home and enjoy the opera in your own home. These come in a number of different views. This is the only one I've ever found. I know there are other people who have multiple versions of it, but they are not real plentiful. Usually they're fairly expensive when you see them. My favorite section of the fair is the zone. It was just a crazy wild place that was full of all kinds of entertainments and amusements. One of the rarer sets of cards from the zone was Frederick Thompson's Toyland Grown Up. Sometimes you'll see it as Toyland GU. Thompson was one of the owners of Luna Park on Coney Island, and he came here and designed this crazy melange of children's things that were all basically grown up. A giant lamp. Here was the Mother Hubbard's cupboard that had shelves. You kids could just run across these little shelves. There were giant versions of the tiny little candy containers that they gave out in those days, like the little jack-o'-lanterns or the rabbits at Easter, where you took the bottom off and they stuffed candy into and put it back on. There were all kinds of wild things, and it was the largest exhibit on the zone. This is a series of about 8 or 9 cards. They are not easy to find at all. If you ever see any of them, you'll want to get them. Here are 2 especially racist views, but it was the time. I just show it here for reference sake. There were 2 of these ball toss things. One was called the African Dip. The other one was called Soakum. On the right, one of my favorite structures on the zone was the souvenir watch palette, which had a giant Uncle Sam hanging over the top, holding a watch. Uncle Sam's, with their arms outstretched, made the columns, each having a watch suspended in between them. And to see this in color must have been spectacular. Inside, they made these souvenir watches and sold them that looked exactly like this watch that's hanging from Uncle Sam's hand. Another one of the larger exhibits at the fair was the Union Pacific Old Faithful Inn exhibit. It was a pretty authentic recreation of the Old Faithful Inn in Yellowstone. There's a series of photo cards of views around the fair, around Old Faithful. There's this great one that shows the cover of a menu. And then this really great one, which I don't really know who this J.R. Catherine's was, but he must have been somehow or other connected with the Old Faithful Inn, and this was saying goodbye to Old Panama Pacific. Here's another one of those very weirdly World's Fair kind of things, Dr. Martin Cooney's infant incubators. This is the only real photo card that I have ever seen just showing the building where the infant incubators were. Cooney, again, was a guy from Coney Island who came up with the idea for treating premature babies to keep them alive, and the medical profession scoffed at. He went and did it on his own. And the way he did it was by putting the premature babies on display. People paid to come in to see these tiny wonders. He saved thousands of lives with this until medical science actually caught up with his progressive ideas. Now his ideas are commonplace today. This is his exhibit at the PPIE. This fenced-in area right in front of the building. There's a little house there. They had live stork that walked around in there and nested in that little miniature house behind the fence. Here's an interesting one too. This, while it's a drawing, looks exactly like what the building looked like. This was the H.L. Judell and Company smoke shop on the Zone. They sold the Chancellor cigars, and it had a big head on the top with a big cigar sticking out of his mouth. At the end glowed red, and smoke twirled out of it over the Zone. Again, this was one, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Fred and Mary Megson's book on the American expositions. This was in as a photocopy, and I saw this years and years ago and salivated over it. I wanted one in the worst way. Again, I looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. And then when I finally, years later, found one, I found 3 of them all at once. Somebody had them that had a gigantic collection of cigar stuff. Cigar and smoking. So there was my whole point earlier about the overlap of interests. So sometimes that's the kind of stuff that makes them hard to find too. But this seller was breaking up this guy's collection. I bought all 3 of them and then sold them to the other 2 to friends of mine. But for years, this was my holy grail card. Here are 3 more. On the bottom right, this is a real photo of opening day on the Zone. You can see it thronged with people. And there's the Souvenir Watch Palace on the left of the throng of people. All the way on the left is a mural that was inside the Diving Girls exhibit, Neptune's Daughters and the Diving Girls. It was a whole big exhibit where women did stunt diving and stuff like that. And then on the upper right-hand corner, well, this isn't scarce per se. It's a real photo card of a concession that was called Trip to the South Pole. What makes it scarce is the fact that this exhibit was one of the first ones to fail. A number of the large exhibits on the Zone failed throughout the run of the fair. To find one that shows it at the opening of the fair completely intact makes it almost better than any of the other ones. Because what happened afterwards is they never took off the ice cap. They never took off the frozen boat. They just broke it up into smaller concessions, like the Lilliputian midgets were in one. There was this thing called the Sign of the Cross that was in one of the others, which was a painting of Jesus that when they turned the lights off, it glowed with a cross on it or something. It was very weird. So there were all kinds of different exhibits that were put in there, but it looked very different after that happened. And then here's probably one of the rarest cards of the PPIE, and this is the one advertising the sale of the jewels from the Tower of Jewels. And it told you where you could get them. And I always love this little poem. Oh, Tower of Jewels, so wondrously bright, thy nova gems sparkling by day and night, flashing their fame o'er the land and the sea. Jewel City, 1915, PPIE. It's a great card. I've only ever seen it a handful of times, 3, 4, maybe at the most. If you ever see it, it's one you want to get because people who collect PPIE stuff besides postcards love this because of the jewels. There's a lot of people that collect the jewels. They're great cards. Now, another interesting group of cards you're going to see are these studio shots. What I recently discovered was that there were actually 4 different photo studios on the Zone. They looked exactly alike, but each one of them had a different name. One was the California Postal Studio, one was the Western States Postal Studio, and Panama Pacific Postal Studio. They each had different backdrops in them, and you can go in and get your picture taken. Sometimes, like this little boy on the right, they put a board that had the date on it so that it was always permanently dated. A lot of them are very generic. They're just people posed. They're lovely cards. I love them. They're not worth a whole lot when they're like that, unless it's an interesting subject matter. Like this one, this kid looks like Buster Brown. The two in the middle are Millie and Teresa of the Samoan village. It's written on the back. Up above is one of the PPIE guards. Down below, they had these wicker things that you could drive around on the fairground called electricettes. And there were these wicker push chairs. And this is a double push chair with a man and or two ladies in it. That's the only one I've ever seen like that. Here's a couple more. These are on the upper left is a vaquero girl and an Indian Native American. They were from the 49er camp that was on the zone. In the center is one that was taken on PPIE Examiner's Day, which is the Examiner newspaper. And I believe these folks were probably newspaper sellers downtown. They were there on Examiner Day. Is some guy named Cy Perkins from Punkerville, Squashtown County. So he was obviously some performer at the fair who put on shows for people or walked around the grounds putting on shows and stuff. Now, the best of the best cards, these are the actual real photo cards. While I love the printed cards too, these were often one of a kind or one of a handful. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of a real photo card and an actual photo card. A real photo card is one that was made but could have been mass produced or was produced in some quantity. An actual photo card was the one that was made once, twice, maybe 3 cards of it, and that was it. So those by nature are even more scarce than the others. I think this one on the left is an actual card of the Tower of Jewels under construction. The one on the right here is the Machinery Hall under construction. It does have a caption written on it. So I think that might have been a real photo one that was produced in a bit more quantity, but they're not readily available. Here's a one-of-a-kind one of a soldier from the Presidio perched on what was to become the tallest flagpole in the world. It was an Oregon log that was floated down to San Francisco and was erected next to the Oregon building, and it was the tallest flagpole in the world. On the right, this is Miss Aldenitka Wolfskill. The Examiner, in a withering critique, described her as a singer of partially developed possibilities. And if she could forget to be critically self-conscious and only sing because there was a song in her heart, craving utterance, I am inclined to think that she would do better. But this was an event that took place at the base of the Dewey Monument in Union Square. And it was when the signal came to blow up the final dam on the Gamboa Locks on the Panama Canal. This is a great card, and I like this because nothing gives a better example of the scale of these structures than this photo. Kind of familiar with pictures of the Tower of Jewels and whatever, but you don't really realize it until you can see it next to, everyone knows what a 2- and 3-story San Francisco building of flats looks like and how tall they are. Look at how diminutive they look in comparison to that building. When you see that, it's really hard to take full measure of the immensity of these structures until you see it standing next to that. This, I think, was a one-of-a-kind real photo that somebody took, and that's again at the Scott Street gates. This is Chief Eagle Eye from the 101 Ranch on the left. On the right was Chief Little Bear of the Cherokee at the PPIE. This is a really great card, and I love it, especially because of the message. It says, now what you think of this courageous little boy sitting right among all these Indian chiefs. These Indians have been brought here not as a show, but as the guests of the railroad companies. Unky sends his regard. On the top is a really great one, real photo of a float of the ferry building, all lit up in miniature. That was, they had a like a maritime day or something, and this was one of the floats that they floated through as part of the parade and stuff. On the bottom is a double fold real photo card that was never folded. These are extremely rare. I have three of them. I have never seen another single one of them. I've seen them from other places, but of the PPIE, these are the only three I've ever seen. And then there are personal real photo cards. What a lot of people don't realize is that the PPIE was one of the first fairs where people actually were taking photographs regularly. However, there was a glitch to it. The fair had an official photographer, Cardinal Vincent. They had a lock on photos and stuff. So if you were going to bring your camera and take pictures at the fair, you had to buy a daily pass that cost $0.25 to take pictures on the fair. And you generally had to wear it on yourself, like this guy on the right here has a strap coming over his shoulder. That's his camera case, and there's something affixed to it. That's the tag, that the permit to take photos. So that way, if police were walking around or guards or whatever, and they saw somebody taking a photo, you had to have that displayed so that you wouldn't get your camera taken away from you. But that also then makes kinds of photo cards extremely scarce. You do not see many of them. Here's another one, the Vanderbilt Cup race at the fair. Now, a lot of you may know that the Liberty Bell came to the PPIE, and here are three different real photo cards of the trip of the Liberty Bell on its way to and from San Francisco. The one at the top is I believe when it arrived at the freight yards in San Francisco. The one on the bottom is the parade where they loaded the bell onto a streetcar railroad bed, drove it to the fairgrounds down Van Ness and into the fairgrounds before taking it to the Pennsylvania building. And I particularly love this one on the left. This was the Liberty Bell at Tracy, California, the night of July 16th, 1915. It was really a big event. I read the articles about it, but all the way across the country and back again, the bell would stop in every little town along the way. People turned out in droves to see the bell, to touch it. There are pictures of people all over the country. And it was the last time that the Liberty Bell ever left Philadelphia. Here's one of San Francisco's 1914 public Christmas tree on the fairgrounds at the fair in the Court of All Nations. Now, these are the last couple I'm going to show you. These are from the post-fair period. What's really great about these are, it's after the fair ended, so it's kind of like the scraps of the fair kind of thing. I only recently got this in the last year, and this is one I've never seen before. The Prometheus loading exhibits from the PPIE at San Francisco on February 20th, 1916. That was a year after the day that the fair opened. A lot of the exhibits, it was interesting what happened with them. Some of them were shipped to San Diego for the San Diego, California exhibit, the Panama, California exhibit. Some of them went back to the government, and the rest of them were sold off to people. You could come to the fair either close to the end of the fair or after and purchase exhibits. Countries were selling off their Turkish shrug, all kinds of things. Then the statuary. Anyone want a statue? As they demolished the buildings, they took all of the statuary off of the buildings, moved them to a big plot of land just adjacent to the marina, where they were all on display, and any town or municipality in California could come and pick statues to take home to put in their towns. So we know that the town of Visalia took the end of the trail, which is the central one in the bottom picture, and also the one of the old Prospector, I think is the name of it, which they both had in Mooney Park in Visalia. Unfortunately, the old Prospector is in pieces, I believe, still behind some building in that park now. It had finally fallen all apart because, again, these were mostly made of lath and plaster. The end of the trail was getting to be in pretty sad shape when it was rescued by the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Enid, Oklahoma. where they took it, restored it, and made a bronze cast of it that they then gave back to Visalia. The bronze cast of it is still on display in Mooney Park in Visalia. Then I think that this is just, to me, the perfect card about the PPIE. What is there not to like about this? The USS Oregon, which is the bulldog of the Navy that spent the run of the fair practically anchored out in the harbor. You could go out to it and tour it on San Francisco Bay, the Tower of Jewels, the fluttering flag, the Presidio off on the right, the buildings off on the left. I think it's a spectacular card, and it's just beautiful. So I just want to say my many thanks to Chuck Bannock, who is a PPIE collector extraordinaire. Without him, I never could have put this talk together because a number of these cards were from him. And so he's a great guy and a supreme collector. And then that's the end. Two kind of scarce cards. This is Art Smith doing his night dive over the fairgrounds. And on the left is a Kewpie card of Kewpies in the sky looking over the fairground and the Palace of Fine Arts and the Tower of Jewels, which these are very hard to find as it is, and then to find them in good condition because they had a crease right about midway that it was perforated around the clouds or the Kewpies, and you could flip the back and make it like a standing card then with the Kewpies up above. You can see that there's a little damage on the right-hand side. They were very small edges that held the brunt of it. So I've only ever seen two different versions of these Kewpie cards. So that's it. That is my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Thank you for that expansive and interesting presentation. You went through a lot of great detail.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Two things. One, I've got a ukulele.
Unofficial ukulele, yes.
And
they were popularized at the fair.
Right. So that was considered the introduction of the ukulele. This is one of the types. This is a kumele. And there's Tamaka, Kumele, and Nunez were the three that at any rate, they were introduced in California, though, at the Hawaiian state. I bought a collection of photos, negatives and so forth, and a couple postcards and letters of someone named Anita Whitney. She and her family attended the exposition. I've got I don't know that she got I'd never heard of getting the pass, the 25-cent pass. But she took a lot of pictures of it, and she was.
Well, then she probably had them.
Maybe. But anyway, and she has an interesting history because she was one of the first people. She was connected to Maria Montessori, who apparently, from what I gather in her notes and stuff, attended and then she was a suffragette.
There was actually a Montessori school at the fair.
Right.
They were teaching.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
One of the last cards you showed was the USS Oregon at anchor out there. Is that's not a produced card, that's a kind of a one of a kind, right?
Well, I think that there was probably a certain quantity of them made because somebody had to be out on the bay taking the photo. I think it may have been a professionally produced photo. I don't know how many of them would have been made. Yeah, but it's a great card.
Oh, it is a beautiful card. And I collect ships, so boy, I'd love to have that one. Okay, thank you.
There were a number of ships at the fair out on the bay, so there are quite a few different real photo cards of the ships that were out there. Sure.
Thank you, Glenn. Kyle had a couple of pictures he wanted to show that add to this.
Sure.
A couple of years ago, I was in China and was in a city of about 4 million people in Western China. Was presented with a photo book because my grandparents were missionaries there. And the picture on the right includes my two grandfathers about the year 1914. The picture on the left is the actual book. So this city is famous in China now for producing liquor, kind of a white whiskey, Baijiu. So it was an exhibitor at the fair. So this is an exhibitor collection that in a way is really undisturbed. So it's kind of interest. So we've seen this poster on the left before. On the right is a preliminary fair bulletin from August of 1913. A couple panoramic photos of the fair. I think the one on the left shows the Chinese pavilion. And I believe they won a gold medal for their whiskey product, and shows the front and the back of the gold medal. Also in the book. And the book includes this top part of the souvenir. This may be a gold-plated version. A rare souvenir bell with a grizzly bear, a symbol of California. Some commemorative markings promoting the exposition, the historic El Camino Real Mission Trail. These bells were cast by the Forbes Foundry in Los Angeles. This is a full-size view of the bell. It just appears to be a bronze version, which maybe hasn't been gold-plated. So just an interesting little coincidence that came my way. Give something that you don't think about. What original collections are there out there of exhibitors?
Well, interestingly, during the 100th anniversary of the fair, we put together a brochure called After the Lights Went Out, and it talks about all of the things from the fair that we were aware of to that point and where they are today. There's actually quite a few pieces of things out there around it about buildings that were moved, things that were exhibited, pieces of Gorham and Tiffany silver that were exhibited there. It's kind of interesting. There's quite a bit of stuff out there, including in China. There was a big exhibit of these kind of miniature Chinese towers that are, I don't remember the town that they're in, but they went back to China afterwards and are on display there, or some big gate that they made or something. Quite a bit of stuff out there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for sharing that.
I really appreciated you coming in from this angle, because it's not the typical PPIE presentation. And I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, good. I'm glad you did. Thank you.
And I read your book before this in order to have an idea, but it's so different from the book you gave me back when I was living in the Bay Area.
Well, that was 25 years ago, that book. So I've added a lot to the collection.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Glenn. You're welcome, Don.
I have a great collection of 1950 fair postcards. Now I'm going to go into them and examine them more carefully. Thank you, Glenn. I appreciated that.
You're very
I wonder if
welcome.
I found any rarities in my collection.
I
You
was
may
curious,
well have
Don.
them.
I was curious what you have. I knew you had some connections here.
His dad and mom both
Oh, my
went there.
parents and grandparents all enjoyed that fair. I
Yeah.
have an admission ticket for my grandmother going in.
Wow.
I'm a big collector of the 1939 New York World's Fair postcards and many similar commercial postcards as well.
I also have the 39 collection. So thank you anyway. It's great again.
Thank you again, Glenn. I think we may have broke some time records here tonight. But thank the people on the East Coast for staying up almost to midnight.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Glenn, thank you very much. I mean, a lot to
Sure.
absorb. Love it. Love it.
Thank you very much.
Very, very
Anytime.
special. Thank you. Everyone, have a great night. We'll see you next month. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.